When Betsy died suddenly and in that shocking way, did that necessarily spell the end for Gene Hackman?
I think Betsy was the person who kept him at home and really did his thinking for him and prompted him in all his day-to-day activities of daily living, so he could live a normal life with her there. Without her there, that just can't happen, because he'd lost so much of his ability to do normal day-to-day things.
So without her, he couldn't have survived?
Definitely not, particularly at an advanced stage, which is where he was in terms of his dementia.
I think what horrifies many people who are aware of this story is what happened in that house for that week after Betsy died. What would Gene have been doing?
It's very doubtful whether Gene would have recognised that she was dead. If someone's lying down with their eyes shut, we tend to think they're asleep, not dead, and that would have been perhaps his reaction, and maybe he would have then gone away, come back again later and found her, but because of his memory problems, he wouldn't have remembered he'd seen her before, so he wouldn't have remembered the time that had passed. And he just wouldn't be able to plan or call for help or do anything like that, because his dementia would have stopped him doing that. He no longer had the ability to do that.
Would have he suffered much distress?
It's hard to know how much insight he had. Was Betsy dead? Then I'm sure he would have been distressed. But if he thought she was asleep, he would have gone away and perhaps done something else and then come back. It's very hard to know, but he was obviously still drinking because he wasn't dehydrated, according to his post-mortem. So he was still able to do some things on his own, but clearly not eat or look after the dog, or look after Betsy.
Or look after himself.
Or look after himself.
So not even being able to call for help, leave the house, go to the neighbours, incapable of doing that.
If you think of dementia as childhood development backwards, Gene Hackman was at maybe the 12-month child stage, so he needed help to do everything, and that's what Betsy was doing. Without her, he couldn't initiate any actions. He couldn't call for help. He may not even have known how to open the front door to go outside, and because he hadn't been outside, he wasn't used to doing it. Turning on a tap and maybe getting a drink of water is something we learn at an early stage. So he was still doing that, but making a sandwich or a cup of tea, anything like that, would have been really difficult for him because he'd lost the ability to do it.
Making a phone call impossible.
Making a phone call impossible. Losing the ability to use a phone is quite common in the earlier stages of dementia. People have memory problems, but they also lose function, and they lose that ability to use a phone, a computer, anything like that. They can't use it anymore. Some of them can't turn on a kettle, to make a cup of tea, or open the drawer to get out a knife to make a sandwich. So that loss of function is what's key to dementia. We know about the memory and changes in personality, but it is the inability to do things for yourself which is the major issue in dementia, and why people need that care, why Betsy needed to be there for Gene, to be his memory, but also his prompting and his hands.
Is there some relief in the sense that he may not have had the ability to suffer anguish or grief because of his memory loss?
I think that's one of the blessings of dementia, and there's very few, but that loss of memory of bad things, and hopefully he wouldn't have been distressed, because that would be a very sad thing for him. But with his very advanced dementia, it is more likely he just walked around.
Do you think Betsy would have known of the risks of being a sole carer? That that his life.
Yes. Clearly she hadn't thought that far ahead. I guess she was considerably younger than he was. She was fit and well until the disease that killed her. So she probably wasn't thinking that. Also, I think she was reluctant to have other people come in and see the level of function that Gene had lost, the man he'd turned into. And I think she was protecting him from that. There's such a lot of stigma and shame attached to the diagnosis of dementia, despite it being so common. And she would have been really keen to protect him from that, and therefore would have tried to do everything herself.
Given his fame and the reverence in which people held him, she probably felt that need to protect him more
Even
than most.
More. Yeah, very much. That reputation he had, she did not want it besmirched.
How common do you think this scenario is? I mean, it just sounds so horrific and so unbelievable, but does it happen commonly?
It's not common, but if you've got an older couple where one is caring for the other, and perhaps, and I can think of a case from my experience where the husband fell over doing the shopping, he broke his shoulder, he was put into hospital, he was quite unwell, and he didn't tell anyone that his wife was at home on her own. It was actually a neighbour about 2 days later that realised that something was going on and found his wife. She was distressed, she was quite dehydrated, but she was okay. He had no one coming in because his wife didn't like strangers in the house. So I think the important thing is, if you are looking after someone with dementia, it's really good to have support, and that support to keep an eye on you and be the backup. Sometimes we don't have family to do it, but there are a lot of support services that are out there.
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing, people are so alarmed that this signifies, I guess, a loss of care within society, that nobody sort of checked in on them in that time frame. Does that say something about where we are today?
We've lost a lot of that connection, that neighbourhood idea. You see it more actually in country towns. There will be more interest, but everybody's so private now. They don't like to have their life exposed, and so often others don't want to intrude, and I think that's one of the big issues that we feel uncomfortable about asking, when really we should be there asking. COVID actually got people talking to each other. Unfortunately, we've pulled back from that a bit, from that lovely connection, because humans are pack animals. We like to live in a community. But in a situation like Gene Hackman's, where Betsy was protecting his reputation, that would be difficult. And it really does illustrate the shame people feel about the diagnosis. Yet it's a diagnosis that is the most likely thing to kill women in Australia and men before too long. It is so common, yet we don't want to talk about it.
I was going to say, with the prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia, how likely is it that we'll all be touched by something like this?
It would be very unusual now for people not to know someone with dementia. Dementia is much more common as we get older, and we're all living longer. Our average life expectancy in Australia now is 85. Well, if you get to 85, you've got a 1 in 3 chance of having dementia. By 90, it's 1 in 2. And most of us want to live to 90. So we do have to be aware of the fact that dementia is common, particularly at that age. With dementia becoming more common, because there's more of us growing old, we really need to look at how do we prevent dementia. We know that almost half of all dementia is preventable. So things like doing enough physical exercise, doing enough mental exercise, eating properly, watching your blood pressure, not smoking, not drinking too much. Those sorts of things are really important.
Well, clearly a lot of people aren't listening to that advice if it's so prevalent.
Nobody wants to go for a walk. They would prefer to pop a pill than go for a walk or do Wordle or do Sudoku. But we really do need to have, I think, a fairly broad community campaign to alert people to the fact you can do something. Hearing loss contributes to 8 to 10% of dementia. Who would have known? And yet in Australia, 80% of hearing aids are in the drawer, not in people's ears. So we've got a bit of work to do there. That's not hard, it's not expensive, but it is important that people know what we can be doing to prevent dementia.
And so when you say go for a walk, is it that simple when you say be physical?
It's going for a brisk walk. You need to be puffing slightly, because the idea is you flush out your brain with oxygenated blood. You're cleaning out the engine. That's really important. Doing that 5 times a week. Going to the gym and doing the occasional weight session is good for the brain. It's really good for the muscles and the bones as well. Doing word puzzles, crosswords, staying at work, being involved as a volunteer if you've retired. All those things are so important. Just staying curious and interested. Going to U3A, University of the Third Age, continuing to learn. That's so important.